Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Daily Friend Show. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Chris Hattingh. Chris, how's it going?
Nicholas, good afternoon. Always good to chat to you. Going well, thanks. Let's see what we can unpack and elucidate in this latest episode of the Daily Friend.
Indeed, it is another week in wacky South Africa, and of course we're also joined by Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you?
I am well. I just saw a headline: 9 elephants on the loose in KZN, and I'm thought I should take a snap of that and send it to my American friends and say that they are vindicated. There really are elephants roaming the streets somewhere, and we won't be getting into that story too deeply. But at least we have that kind of story to remind ourselves.
Well, of course, the story we haven't yet covered on the Daily Friend Show is the State of the Nation address, which was given on Thursday, which was after our last episode of the week. And I think the sort of main headlines I saw was mixed response to President Cyril Ramaphosa's State of the Nation address. So a lot of organizations seem to say roughly the same thing. ATA, for example, said that the president's speech failed to inspire hope and restore public trust in the government, instead opting for recycled rhetoric and meaningless highlights. A CEO of a realty company said that the speech lacked substance to back up government's lofty goals. What we needed to hear was a detailed plan for economic recovery, but much of Ramaphosa's speech may as well have been copy and paste of last year's SONA and the one delivered the year before, which is both disillusioning and discouraging. The DA initially seemed to sort of say, well, it was a good speech, but actually it's not going to be implemented, so don't get your hopes up. The DA's initial reaction was John Steenhuisen saying the proof of the pudding is in the eating, so we caution all South Africans to hold the applause until these announcements have become actions, if they ever do. But then it seems that they shifted their tone to being a little bit more anti the content of the speech. Steenhuisen later said, South Africa's in deep, deep trouble. We needed to hear about the real progress on real solutions to our real challenges. Instead, Ramaphosa used beautiful words and soothing tones to offer empty promises and impractical plans. The EFF described the speech as, quote, nothing new, and that insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. And that Ramaphosa was trying to, quote, hide the dead horse. So, interesting. But gentlemen, let me start with you, Chris. What were the highlights of the State of the Nation address for you? What did you think was important? What was your overall takeaway from the speech? And how do you rate it?
Yeah, on a purely superficial reading, one can give the president some wins with his radical statement about only the private sector can create jobs and the government should create the environment for that. I nearly fell off my seat, and then I remembered who I was listening to and what the animating ideology is of the president and his colleagues and the ruling party, which is, of course, the National Democratic Revolution. I wonder why actually the speech wasn't widely praised, because it reiterated, and the details reiterated, the party's commitment to its policies, its ideas that it's been pushing for the last 15, 20 years, which is about bringing about a sort of utopia of perfect equality and everyone dependent on the government and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not sure, actually, to me it showed consistency that Ramaphosa is getting his party together on that path. But of course, that's not the kind of path we all want for South Africa. When it comes to the actual details, the president reiterated the party's commitment to the national health insurance. His minister of Justice, Ronald Lamola, has reiterated that the party is committed to expropriation without compensation. He talked a big game about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, while at the same time talking about how his government will stick with localization master plans, which are fundamentally protectionist and will restrict the benefits of the free trade area, especially for South Africans, which will make imported goods more expensive. So on the one hand, he started off all big game about the private sector. By the end of it, reiterating a lot of the government's policies about interventionism and a sort of command control economy. I was expecting something around price controls, but maybe that's coming, so let me not bury the lead. Maybe that'll happen at some point. And of course, we have the extension of the basic income grant until the end of March 2023. So we didn't have sorry, not a basic income grant, of the 350 Rand social relief grant. So we didn't have a basic income grant, but effectively, that's what the government has committed to. So maybe trying to assuage some concerns by bodies such as the International Monetary Fund, saying we aren't going to go crazy just yet. Let's get our fiscal house in order. Don't worry, we won't actually spin off or privatize any SOEs, but just give us a few months or years and we'll get some more welfare going. So yeah, if you want to read it superficially, a very good speech, sort of lofty ideals, that kind of thing. And then if you look at details, I would give it an F at best, because from my perspective, of course, none of the reforms, quote unquote, that were talked about are actual radical reforms. It's simply keeping South Africa on the path of state interventionism.
So, Gabriel, same question to you. What are your takeaways? And also, I just want to throw in there, there was some discussion, of course, about the cannabis industry. Now, I'm pretty sure that the legislation on cannabis use and growing and that kind of stuff is still kind of in limbo. It hasn't gone through the parliamentary process. So it seems a bit weird that the president would talk about it when it's still sort of trapped in this gray zone. Your thoughts on that and your thoughts on the speech?
Okay, we'll start with cannabis. Yeah, the Constitutional Court before the pandemic gave Parliament, I think it was 24 months to amend legislation so as to bridge the gap between something like the dignity and privacy rights that it felt protected cannabis growth and personal consumption, and the prohibition thereupon. And what I lobbied for is for Parliament to resolve that problem by basically allowing the commercial growth of, for sure, medical stuff with lower regulations, although that is already available, also for commercial retail use. And in particular, to do so in a way that would allow current growers in very poor parts of KZN to continue to grow and to basically not have to sell their wares to mobsters in the taxi industry, where gogos who sort of work very hard to, will sell a packet sort of 1 meter tall for 20 Rand, which will then retail on the street for thousands of rands. So they're really not seeing much of it. Most of it's being seen by logistics people whose basic value add is that they're prepared to break the law in like a more aggressive way. Anyway, in other words, I think it's a really good idea to liberalize that market. There's definitely a lot of support for it. There's something ironic about the fact that at the union buildings, the president's office, there were so many marijuana plants growing that eventually the so-called Bushmen or Khoisan people who were
protesting out there,
were finally removed. Yes, the matter hasn't been resolved by Parliament. It is crazy. It is a president's prerogative to use a thing like the State of the Nation address to speak to Parliament and say, this is my plan. You guys should get in line. It's totally fine for the president to try and lobby effectively in Parliament for Parliament to accelerate its programs in terms of laws that they have to pass that will allow things to go forward. It's also an opportunity for him to effectively spank his ministers' bottoms by saying, there are regulations that need, clearly the bandwidth that's, always about to be auctioned off is an embarrassment. And I think that I think that Ramaphosa did not do that enough. So I might come at this from a slightly different angle to Chris, although I think that he's basically 100% right. I think that there is something to be said for the speech that does not have specific plans. If I think of the great speeches in American and British history, for example, they were often very plan light. What made them excellent was, amongst other things, the courage to identify the problem and focus energy on tackling that problem. I think that's somewhere that Ramaphosa seemed to be on track. When he said, government's not going to create sustainable jobs, the private sector needs to do that. He seemed to be getting to the point where he was going to say, you know what the problem is? The problem is us, corrupt officials, using race as a fig leaf to hide crony capitalist sort of basically theft of the public purse, a creation of red tape that garrots free enterprise. And we can do better, and we will do better. I think a speech like that would have been even more popular. I say that on the basis of the biggest political poll, I think, ever done in South Africa in 2017, commissioned by ENCA, which showed 80% of the ANC base did not want more radical economic transformation, were opposed to more radical economic transformation. Most wanted more business-friendly solutions. And 80% wanted Ramaphosa over Dlamini Zuma. So that's how the ANC base saw it. They saw Ramaphosa as the guy who will put a big stick to corruption, who will give big support to business, to private enterprise. And they saw that as the best way to get jobs. This being, another way to say that most South Africans are pretty centrist, maybe even a bit conservative. And that's what they saw in Ramaphosa. That's what they hoped for. He started out sounding like that, but he stopped sounding like that. Never mind the plans. Then when you get to the level of the plans, as Mondli Makanya, chief editor at City Press, pointed out so devastatingly in a piece called The Non-Existent President, if you just take quotes from his 2018 Sona and quotes from his 2022 Sona and you put them next to each other, it's basically copy-paste. So it's like self-plagiarism, but without recognizing that I promised this 4 years ago. I haven't done it. Now I'm going to do it. If he'd said that, he'd be pointing out what the problem is, which is either himself or his fellow cadres. And he didn't do that. He could have done it. He didn't do it. I think the most interesting thing, therefore, about this is not what the president said, because it is more same. I think it's the response around it, which has been unusually negative and forthright, and it was in the build-up, and it has been subsequently, notwithstanding a few good news. I'm thinking of Mbongis like Adrian Basson. Even he sort of followed it up with a lot of criticism. That's telling. And I'll finish off my long tirade by saying what I was telling Chris earlier. If you look at Ipsos polling, when Jacob Zuma became president, there was a new dawn. It didn't have that name, but there was huge confidence boost in South Africa. There'd been a worry. Becky and Zuma are fighting. Is there going to be a constitutional crisis? Is there going to be some kind of civil war? Malema saying he's going to kill and die for Zuma. It's very scary. What's going to happen to markets? We survived. We had a peaceful election. We pushed through the global financial crisis in 2009 with unusually positive results. People like Peter Bruce were explaining to us that Zuma actually understands business and he's going to be good to it. And if you think he's corrupt, you must be a racist. And people listened and they said, that is very wise. Everything is going to be okay. And it was a very, very happy time in South Africa. And it took years. It took many years. It took really until 2013, until after the Bloemfontein conference, effectively, when Zuma just won again. And people were like, hold on, this is not serious. Something's going wrong here, for that confidence to dwindle. Right. History repeats itself, just quicker. The same new dawn, false dawn, red dawn disillusionment has come faster this time. And I think that is very interesting for 2024.
And of course, my favorite example of that is the DA getting slammed by pretty much all of the major news commentators for its Stop Zuma campaign. When just a few years later, Stop Zuma basically became the rallying cry of the whole nation. And to not say Stop Zuma was to put yourself as an outcast. So,
yeah, and it's a similar thing with Ramaphosa. In the beginning, it was Ramaphosa will fix everything. And now it's like, if you say Ramaphosa is going to fix everything, people don't laugh at you behind their mouths anymore. They just go, they laugh at you in your face because, like, have you not been paying attention?
Chris, final thoughts before we move on.
Just that I'm going to look forward to the details of all of these promises and plans from the finance minister in a short while to see how that rugby ball has been passed on to him now, and whether he kicks for touch or what exactly he tries to do with. Maybe he'll do some fancy moves like we saw with Ireland over the weekend. Let's see.
Can I hop in and just say?
Go ahead.
I just want to hop in to say one detail on the extension of the state of disaster. Really, really good case in point. Ramaphosa, and I think he really. I don't want to underestimate how important it is for the president to give a message of hope to South Africans who are finally pulling out of the pandemic into the endemic endgame. We clearly had a good fourth wave, lower deaths than the average flu season, and pressure from the friends of the IRR. Thank you so much. 20,000 signatures. The president knows how unhappy South Africans are. Experts are unhappy with it too. So he says I've got a clear intention to end the state of disaster. As soon as I can figure out how to not end the state of disaster by getting the current regulations passed through another format to contain the pandemic. So I mean, the only real regulation, the most recently passed regulation, is that the government has the ability to arrest you and detain you for 2 days while seeking out a warrant for the crime of sniveling and having a positive PCR test. So it's pretty wild deviation from habeas corpus, due process, most fundamental sort of criminal justice liberal reforms that have stood for centuries against tyranny. It's not clear if that is containing the pandemic. It's not clear if it's even being used. It is clear to me that it's a dangerous law to have on the books, and it's very dangerous to try and now pass that through some other means. So our lawyers are literally right now writing to the president, and that campaign to disband the Command Council in the state of disaster, it's ongoing, and we really appreciate your support. Sorry for hijacking the end of the SONA thing, Nick. But
No,
it's important to
very,
communicate that.
a very welcome hijacking. I also just want to say, with regards to SONA, that I think one thing that's not always recognized is how much the bureaucracy does take a cue from SONA. If you listen to sort of departmental plans and departmental reports and the things actually produced by the officials, almost all of it makes extensive reference to SONA and what was said in SONA and that kind of thing. So, it is pretty important for setting the tone in some ways, even if it is a sort of a copy paste. You can still see officials take it very seriously, even if society doesn't. It's just kind of interesting the way that government seems to work on a different level to the rest of us. But anyway, okay, let's move on to our next story today. And we're sticking with the president here. So the president last week was before the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, known as SCOPA, and he was answering some questions relating to a recording that had leaked of him at a National Executive Committee meeting of the ANC in March of 2021, where he made reference to, and Gabriel will, I think, explain in more detail, but he made reference to money from the State Security Agency being used for internal elections for leadership positions in the ANC. He said before SCOPA that what he was referencing there, he didn't have any additional details about it. It was all just him hearing about it in the media, and so he can't be expected to talk anymore really about it because he knows as much as we do about the misuse of public funds for ANC internal campaigns. But Gabriel, you note that there is some very important details in the leaked recording of Ramaphosa at that NEC meeting.
Yeah, I mean, so let's just preface this by saying this all goes back to the 2017 campaign. At this period, I was talking about where 80% of people supported Ramaphosa in the ANC's base, and 80% opposed radical economic transformation. That seemed to be the thing. Here we've got the business-friendly guy. And even though it is so asymmetrical, it became a 50-50 split vote, basically, at the Nasrec convention, because the ANC as a party is not democratically sensitive to its base. Instead, it's all about the internal cut and thrust. And 1 or 2 billion rand was spent in that series of fancy dinners and soirees to try and, or maybe brown envelopes, to try and win votes in the CR17 NDZ campaign. So it was kind of the shadiest election that South Africa's ever seen. The main scandal to come out of it, in my opinion, of course, was the fact that Bosasa, a criminal syndicate stealing money that's supposed to go to prisoners' blankets, ended up being a major funder of the CR17 campaign, in part through Ramaphosa's son. And there, the great scandal was that Ramaphosa's son was brought onto Bosasa as a consultant, as a BEE partner. How the billionaire president's son counts as previously disadvantaged is something that no one has managed to explain to me yet. I look forward to anyone in the comment section trying. Of course, it's something that no one has asked the president yet, because our very, very courageous media knows better than that. So that issue was ignored. Here's what Ramaphosa said, was caught on tape saying should also be ignored. Whatever's going on at the NDZ campaign, he said, let the heat fall on the CR17 campaign. And he said, let the impression stand that what's happened is that money has been funneled through a private business person rather than coming out of the taxpayer's pocket through the State Security Agency, through the SSA. So this is doubly problematic. Firstly, it gives you a sense of what unity within the ANC means. It means the person with the ability to take the heat should take the heat, rather than transparency and accountability and the light being shone wherever public interest may go. In other words, unity means shielding Dlamini Zuma from scrutiny. And secondly, it indicates a rather alarming attitude towards the public purse and its protection. Now, the fact that Ramaphosa says that he wasn't basing what he said on hard insider intel, but instead was going off of the news, doesn't do anything to dig him out of the hole that he's in. Let's go back to the basic distinction between a description of fact and a description of intention or plan, right? If he says, I got my facts here or I got my facts there, that doesn't matter. What's disturbing about that taped conversation is what he says he wants to do, which is conceal what he believes to be the case. So it's like whether you thought you were stealing gold because someone told you that there was gold in the box, or because you'd seen it with your own eyes, if you're caught on tape saying, look, I'm taking the suitcase because it's full of gold, that's really the issue. I think it's extremely disturbing. I think the free pass that's given to Cyril Ramaphosa by many people has been a kind of soft bigotry of low expectations, nasty maternalistic racism. I think in other cases it's been insiders that sort of sit on his ticket and require his largesse, a positive affinity with Ramaphosa to get them access to Ramaphosa. If you can interview the president, you're guaranteed 100,000 views on YouTube. So you better be nice to him so that you can get that interview and so on. But really, I think people who take this country seriously should expect that it's up to us to set the standards for what presidential behavior should be. I think Ramaphosa has really failed hard on this regard. And I think that this is part of the reason that people who have formerly been very willing to talk nonsense in defense of the president are becoming increasingly impatient. It's not just a matter of chance or timing. It's also this fact that while they don't want to go after him directly on the fact that his son is getting money as a previously disadvantaged person and he is concealing nefarious elements of his party and trying to put up smoke screens to conceal potential abuses of state power. On top of that, he is on tape caught doing it and still doesn't even offer a proper apology or defense for himself. And the final point here, if you don't think any of this was serious enough, is to consider Arthur Fraser, Ramaphosa's appointment to the head of the SSA, a person who, the evidence file against that guy really is as long as my arm and as thick as my own skull. And it's hugely humiliating to South Africa. I mean, there's no one in the CIA or Mossad or, there's no intelligence agency in the world who looks at that and goes, oh, that's great. Because precisely what the SSA's problem was is that it created a huge slush fund connected to prostitutes, brothels, sports cars, all kinds of blatant, brazen, consumerist decadence in a country where most people don't have a job, my age and younger, where it's very hard for people to get protein on the plate every day. Taking taxpayer money to do that's just not on. And yet he got, basically promoted. I'm irritated by this, obviously, and it's a hot day. But Nicholas, I expect better.
Yeah, no, I agree with you completely. I also feel your blinding rage through the screen. It's very good. It's very cleansing. Chris, any comments on this before we move on?
I need to ask Gabriel if he thinks part of the sort of media commentariat letting the president get away with these sorts of things, even this sort of hard evidence, is because there's still this perception of maybe two or more factions within the party, and just he's leading the reformist wing. So let's not press him too much on what he might have done wrong here or there. He's trying to lead the party in the right direction. So I wonder if that's part of helping to understand why the sort of free, like, blank check happens, or if it's probably just a bunch of other factors as well, but I'm just wondering if that's one of them.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that that's part of the problem, is that we in South Africa like to debate personalities. Who's your favorite personality? And Ramaphosa speaks really well. And so if you pick between him and anyone else on the NEC, you're probably going to like him best. You'd probably feel most comfortable inviting him over to the golf club or the choir, rehearsal, or whatever it is you do on a Tuesday for fun. And if politics is a popularity contest, then Ramaphosa wins. The sense of he has the best chance to get us out of the sticky mess. But it's clearly not based on policy analysis, because if you're going on a policy analysis, he is the head of the RET faction. He's the best thing the RET faction ever did. The great socialist dream from the 1960s, from the death of Stalin in 1953, was to reinvent socialism with a human face. He's got a very human face. He's a very likable character.
Oh, I like it. It's very good. Very good line, rather, not very good thing you're talking about. But anyway, let us very briefly cover our last story today, which is, of course, a story from the International Monetary Fund. So this was reported, I believe, in Bloomberg, and other media outlets have picked it up. According to the International Monetary Fund, the South African government is at least thinking about taking over part or all of Eskom's 392 billion rand debt. So this is the government has in recent months talked about, Eskom needs to basically get off the government teat, and it needs to start, making money again, and that's why it's going to raise the price of electricity, and we're not going to give it any more handouts. And at the same time, they've sort of continued to give it handouts. Gabriel, very briefly, what do you make of this?
So very briefly, Eskom's debt is sovereign debt. It might not be listed like that in the accounting book, but it's an unfunded liability, which just means it's debt that we haven't figured out how to pay for yet. I think that in that sense, maybe this is much ado about nothing. I think the very concerning thing would be if the way that the government takes on that debt, through whether it's a debt swap or an equity share further buy-in. I mean, it's already the only shareholders, so it's like hard to know exactly what the mechanism would be if it's just if it's literally just changing the name of the debt. But if it does so in such a fashion that creates more room for silly bailouts, then I guess that would be a serious problem. For now, I think that the deeper issue, I think Eskom's issues were largely financial, and while major issues remain there, its debt servicing costs have come down enough that I think the major issue now is its inability to create stable power and its inability to collect revenue from users. Those were always the big three, and the other two, I think, are sort of trumping the financial issue now. So I'm not really sure what to make of the story.
Chris, very briefly.
I'm just wondering if US Speaker Pelosi has given South African government some ideas about how you can tell one side of government certain insider info and make sure that people reap the benefits of that, and rig the system in that way to make sure that they make a killing off the bonds and off the debts. I mean, yeah, just the biggest issue in the South African context is that gross government debt is probably at 69% now at the moment of GDP. And debt servicing costs have been the fastest growing line item since 2011. So, I mean, at some point, someone's going to have to pay for that. I think it's unconscionable to now increase government debt and pass that on to future generations when we have a 74% youth unemployment rate. So in that context, as I think Gabriel rightly points out, it's in effect, it's still just, government taking on more debt in the future, regardless of whether we say it's in Eskom or whether it's on the government's books kind of thing. So something something will break at some point, unfortunately.
I mean, one of the good things might be, just by the way, that gross government debt figure excludes the sort of unfunded liabilities that government
Right.
has in terms of SOE's debt that they might not be able to recoup. So if every SOE's debt was put back officially on South Africa's, national gross government debt books, from 2019, it looked like we'd already be over 100% to GDP ratio. With the pandemic extra debts that we've taken on, I think it's alarming to consider how high it might be. So the IMF might, in a way, just be trying to say, look, let's pay attention to the fact that the debt situation is even worse than it seems to be. But of course, that's not unique to South Africa. That's alarmingly true in places like the US, where their social security debts are really about to hit the fan.
Indeed. Anyway, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the show, please like us and like the video. Leave us a review if you're listening to us on a podcast app, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're very close to 8,000 subscribers, and we are very well on our way to the journey towards 10,000 subscribers, which would be a nice little benchmark to make. So please, if you enjoy our news commentary, share us, like us, all the social media engagement stuff, so that the almighty algorithm will bless us in the future. We greatly appreciate that. And with that, everyone, have a most excellent day, and we'll see you tomorrow. Cheers.